The crack of the whip echoed through the dusty town square of Silver Creek, followed by a heart-wrenching cry that stopped Jack Northwood in his tracks. It was 1873, and the Montana Territory had seen its share of cruelty, but something about this particular sound made his blood run cold. Pushing through the gathering crowd, his tall frame and broad shoulders creating a path, Jack saw a sight that would forever alter the course of his life. A young woman, barely more than 20, was tied to the wooden post outside the general store. Her dress hung in tatters, exposing her thin back where angry red welts were forming. Sheriff Tanner was administering justice for what appeared to be a minor theft, if the small loaf of bread lying in the dirt was any indication. "That's enough," Jack's voice boomed across the square. The townsfolk turned to stare at the newcomer, a man they'd seen riding in just yesterday. His dark hair fell in waves beneath his Stetson, and his blue eyes blazed with righteous anger. Sheriff Tanner lowered his whip and spat tobacco juice into the dust. "This ain't your concern, stranger. This thief needs to learn her lesson." Jack stepped forward, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. "I'm making it my concern. How much is her debt?" The sheriff looked Jack up and down, noting the quality of his clothes and the polished colt at his hip. $2 for the bread, plus $5 fine for stealing." Without hesitation, Jack reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out $10 in gold coins, tossing them at the sheriff's feet. "That covers her debt and then some," Jack said, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. "Now cut her down." The crowd murmured as Sheriff Tanner begrudgingly pocketed the money and nodded to his deputy to untie the woman. As the ropes fell away, she collapsed, too weak to stand. Jack moved swiftly, catching her before she hit the ground. Up close, he could see how desperately thin she was, her cheekbones sharp beneath dirt-streaked skin, her eyes sunken with exhaustion and hunger. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she whispered, her voice raspy from screaming. "Emma O'Sullivan." Without another word, Jack lifted her into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed. He carried her through the parting crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares. "Where are you taking her?" Sheriff Tanner called after him. Jack turned slightly, his expression hard. "Away from here." He carried Emma to the town's only hotel, where he'd taken a room the previous night. The clerk's eyes widened as Jack entered with the half-conscious woman in his arms, but a stern look from Jack silenced any questions. Once in his room, Jack gently laid Emma on the bed. In the light streaming through the window, he could see the full extent of her condition. Not only was her back a mess of welts and cuts, but she was clearly malnourished, her wrists so thin he could encircle them completely with his thumb and forefinger. "I'll fetch a doctor," he said, turning to leave. Emma's hand shot out with surprising strength, grabbing his wrist. "No doctor," she pleaded, her green eyes wide with fear. "They'll just send me back." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I need to clean those wounds." He poured water from the pitcher into the wash basin and tore one of his clean shirts into strips. With tender care, he began to bathe her injured back, wincing at each suppressed whimper that escaped her lips. "Why did you help me?" Emma asked, her face turned away from him, pressing into the pillow. Jack dipped the cloth back into the water, which was now tinged pink with her blood. "I couldn't stand by and watch such injustice. But you don't know me, I could be exactly what they said, a thief." Jack's hands paused in their ministrations. "Were you stealing that bread?" There was a long silence before Emma's voice came, small and ashamed. "Yes, I haven't eaten in 3 days." "Then you're not a thief," Jack said firmly. "You're just someone trying to survive." After he'd cleaned and dressed her wounds, Jack ordered food from the hotel restaurant, a hearty stew, fresh bread, and milk. He helped Emma sit up, propping her against the pillows, and watched as she tried to restrain herself from devouring the food too quickly. "Slow down," he advised gently. "Your stomach needs time to adjust." As Emma ate, Jack studied her. Despite the dirt and bruises, he could see she was beautiful, with auburn hair that fell in tangled waves down her back and a constellation of freckles across her nose and cheeks. What brings you to Silver Creek?" he asked, trying to distract her from gulping down the stew. Emma set down her spoon, her eyes downcast. "I was heading to Billings to find work. My parents died of fever last winter in St. Louis. I had an uncle in Billings, but when I arrived, I learned he'd moved on to California." She took a shaky breath. "I've been traveling on foot, doing odd jobs where I could find them, but work's been scarce." Jack nodded, understanding all too well the harsh realities of life on the frontier. "I'm heading to my ranch near Helena. It's about 3 days' ride from here." He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to come along. I could use help around the place, and there's a small cabin you could stay in." Emma's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" "Because everyone deserves a chance," Jack replied simply. "And I've been alone too long." For the first time, a small smile touched Emma's lips. "Thank you, Mr. Northwood, Jack Northwood, but just Jack is fine." "Thank you, Jack," Emma said, her voice gaining strength. "I accept your offer." They left Silver Creek the next morning, Emma riding behind Jack on his sturdy bay gelding. Her wounds were still painful, but Jack had fashioned a padded seat from his bedroll to make the ride more comfortable. As they put distance between themselves and the town, Emma felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "My ranch isn't much to look at yet," Jack told her as they rode through a grove of aspens, their leaves rustling in the morning breeze. "I bought the land 2 years ago after working cattle drives for nearly a decade, been building it up slowly." "Do you have family there?" Emma asked, holding tentatively to his waist as the horse navigated a steep incline. Jack shook his head. "No family. My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my uncle in Texas, but he passed on 5 years ago." There was a note of loneliness in his voice that resonated with Emma's own sense of isolation. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Life goes on," Jack replied, but his voice had softened too. They camped that night beneath a vast canopy of stars, with a small fire warding off the early autumn chill. Jack insisted Emma take his bedroll while he slept with just his coat for warmth. As she watched him staring into the flames, his strong profile illuminated by the flickering light, Emma felt a strange fluttering in her chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. "Why did you really help me?" she asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Jack looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I told you no one does something like that without a reason," Emma interrupted, "especially not in a place like Silver Creek." Jack was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and haunted. "I had a sister once, Caroline. She was a lot like you, stubborn, independent. She left home young, wanted to make her own way." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Last I heard, she was working in a saloon in Deadwood. When I went to find her, I discovered she'd died the winter before, starvation and cold." His jaw tightened. "No one helped her." Emma's throat constricted with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Jack." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pain that transcended time. "When I saw you there, being whipped for trying to survive, I couldn't walk away. Not again." The next morning, Emma awoke to find Jack already up, brewing coffee over a fresh fire. He handed her a tin cup of the strong, black liquid and a piece of jerky. "Not much of a breakfast," he apologized, "but we'll reach the next town by midday. We can get a proper meal there." As they rode, Emma noticed how Jack constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to any potential danger. His protective nature both comforted and intrigued her. She'd been alone for so long that the feeling of someone watching out for her was almost foreign. By noon, they reached the small settlement of Pine Creek. Unlike Silver Creek, this town had a welcoming feel, with children playing in the streets and women chatting as they hung laundry on lines stretched between buildings. Jack led them to a small cafe where they ordered hearty plates of beans, bacon, and cornbread. Emma ate with enthusiasm, her strength returning with each meal. As they ate, she noticed Jack watching her with a slight smile. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," he replied, looking away. "It's just good to see you eating well." After their meal, Jack surprised Emma by leading her to the town's general store. "You need some proper clothes," he said, gesturing to her tattered dress. "Pick out whatever you need." Emma hesitated, uncomfortable with his generosity. "I can't accept more charity, Jack." "I'll work off every penny once we reach your ranch." Jack's expression softened. "It's not charity, Emma. It's an investment in my new ranch hand." He smiled, the gesture transforming his serious face. "Besides, I can't have you showing up at my place looking like you've been through a war." Reluctantly, Emma selected a few simple dresses, undergarments, a warm coat for the approaching winter, and sturdy boots. When Jack added a pretty blue ribbon for her hair to the pile, she blushed but didn't protest. As they prepared to leave Pine Creek, they were approached by a young deputy who eyed them with suspicion. "You folks just passing through?" he asked, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Heading to my ranch near Helena," Jack replied evenly. "Is there a problem, deputy?" The young man shifted uncomfortably. "Got word from Silver Creek about a man who kidnapped a prisoner. Description matches you, sir." Emma felt Jack tense beside her, but his expression remained calm. "I didn't kidnap anyone. I paid this lady's debt and offered her employment. She came willingly." The deputy looked to Emma for confirmation. "That true, miss?" Emma straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "Absolutely true. This man saved my life. I'd be dead in Silver Creek if not for his kindness." After a moment's hesitation, the deputy nodded. "All right then. Safe travels to you both." As he walked away, Emma heard him mutter, "Damn Tanner and his grudges." Back on the trail, Emma's curiosity got the better of her. What did he mean about Sheriff Tanner having grudges? Jack sighed, adjusting his hat against the afternoon sun. "Tanner and I have history. I worked as a deputy in Silver Creek briefly when I first came to these parts. Left after I saw how he treated people, especially women and Indians. He's never forgiven me for speaking out against him." "Is that why you were in Silver Creek? To confront him?" Jack shook his head. "No, I was there on business, selling some cattle to a buyer. Seeing Tanner again was just bad luck for him." He glanced back at Emma with a grin that made her heart skip. "For me, it turned out differently." They rode until dusk, making camp beside a clear stream. This time, Emma insisted on helping, gathering wood for the fire while Jack tended to his horse. As they sat eating a simple supper of beans and dried apple slices, Emma found herself studying Jack's hands, strong, capable hands that had been gentle when tending her wounds. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, trying to distract herself from thoughts that made her cheeks warm. Jack's face lit up as he described the 100 acres of rolling grassland, the small herd of cattle he was building, the cabin he'd constructed with his own hands, and his plans for expansion. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads," he admitted, "but it's mine. Land a man can call his own means something out here." "It sounds wonderful," Emma said sincerely. She'd never had a home to call her own, not really. Even her parents' small apartment in St. Louis had been rented. As night deepened around them, the temperature dropped sharply. Emma shivered despite the fire's warmth. "Come here," Jack said suddenly, opening his coat in invitation. Emma hesitated, aware of the impropriety. "I'm fine, really." "You're shivering," Jack pointed out. "And I can hear your teeth chattering from here. It's practical, Emma, nothing more." After another moment's hesitation, Emma moved to sit beside him, allowing him to wrap his coat around both of them. The immediate warmth was a relief, but the closeness brought a different kind of heat to her cheeks. "Better?" Jack asked, his voice unexpectedly husky. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They sat in silence, watching the flames dance, until Emma's eyes grew heavy and she found herself leaning against Jack's solid shoulder. "I should get some sleep," she murmured, reluctantly pulling away from his warmth. "Of course," Jack agreed, helping her to her feet. "We have another long day tomorrow." As Emma settled into her bedroll, she caught Jack watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't until she was on the edge of sleep that she realized what it was: tenderness. The next day brought them into increasingly rugged terrain as they approached the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Emma marveled at the landscape's beauty, towering pines, dramatic rock formations, and glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. "It's breathtaking," she said as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a vast valley. "This is why I chose Montana," Jack replied, his gaze sweeping over the vista. "First time I saw this land, I knew I'd found home." They were about to continue when Jack suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the rifle in his saddle holster. "What is it?" Emma whispered, sensing his alarm. "Riders," Jack said grimly, nodding toward a cloud of dust in the distance. "Coming fast, could be nothing, but we'd best find cover." He urged his horse off the trail and into a dense stand of trees, helping Emma dismount quickly. "Stay here with Samson," he instructed, handing her the horse's reins. "I'm going to scout ahead." Before she could protest, Jack had disappeared into the undergrowth, moving with the silent grace of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. Emma waited anxiously, one hand stroking the horse's neck to keep him quiet, the other gripping the small knife Jack had given her for protection. After what felt like an eternity, Jack returned, his expression grim. "4 men, heavily armed. I recognized one of them works for Tanner." Emma's blood ran cold. "They're looking for us," Jack nodded. "Appears so. Tanner must want you back badly or wants to make an example of me." "What do we do?" Emma asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Jack considered their options. "We can't outrun them on one horse, and fighting isn't ideal given the odds." He looked at her intently. "How good are you at climbing?" An hour later, Emma found herself perched precariously on a narrow ledge halfway up a rocky cliff face, her new dress snagged in several places, her hands scraped raw. Jack crouched beside her, watching as the riders passed directly below their hiding spot. "They're heading northeast," he whispered. "Away from my ranch. Once they're out of sight, we'll double back and take a different route." Emma nodded, trying to ignore the throbbing in her back where her barely healed wounds protested the exertion. Jack noticed her discomfort and frowned. "I'm sorry about this," he said softly. "I never meant to put you in danger." "You didn't," Emma replied firmly. "Sheriff Tanner did that long before I met you. At least now I'm not facing it alone." Something shifted in Jack's eyes at her words, a spark of connection that made Emma's breath catch. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the danger below temporarily forgotten. The spell was broken by the distant sound of gunfire. Jack immediately tensed, peering cautiously over the ledge. "Looks like they found something to shoot at besides us," he observed. "Probably a deer or mountain lion, but it's our chance to move." The descent was more challenging than the climb, with loose rocks threatening to give way beneath their feet. When Emma slipped, Jack caught her with one strong arm around her waist, pulling her against him to steady her. The contact sent a jolt through Emma that had nothing to do with fear. "Careful," Jack murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I've got you." Once back on level ground, they quickly retrieved Samson, who was contentedly grazing where they'd left him hidden. Jack helped Emma mount, then swung up behind her, reversing their previous riding arrangement. "This way I can shield you better if necessary," he explained, reaching around her to take the reins. Emma was acutely aware of his chest pressed against her back, his arms encircling her as he guided the horse. They rode in silence, taking a winding path through dense forest that would hide their tracks. By nightfall, Emma was exhausted, her body aching from the day's exertions. They made camp in a small clearing, and Jack insisted on examining Emma's back. "Some of these wounds have reopened," he said, his voice tight with concern as he gently cleaned the injuries. "I'm sorry, Emma, this is my fault." "Stop saying that," Emma chided, wincing as he applied a salve he'd purchased in Pine Creek. "You've done nothing but help me since the moment we met." Jack's hands stilled on her back. "Why aren't you afraid of me, Emma?" The question surprised her. "Should I be?" Most women would be wary of a stranger who carried them off, especially out here. Emma turned to face him, forgetting her state of partial undress. "You're not a stranger anymore, Jack, and I'm a good judge of character had to be, living on my own, you're a good man." Jack's gaze dropped to her exposed shoulders, then quickly lifted to her face, a flush spreading across his cheekbones. "You should rest," he said abruptly, standing and moving away. "We'll reach the ranch tomorrow if we push hard." Emma watched him retreat to the other side of the small fire, confused by his sudden withdrawal. As she pulled her dress back into place, she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. In that moment, she realized that Jack Northwood might be as drawn to her as she was to him, and that thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with frost coating the grass around their campsite. They ate a quick breakfast of the last of their provisions, then set out on what Jack promised would be the final leg of their journey. As they rode, Emma felt a growing nervousness that had nothing to do with pursuing lawmen. She was about to begin a new life at Jack's ranch, and despite his kindness, she was still essentially dependent on him, a situation she'd sworn to avoid after her parents' death. "You've gone quiet," Jack observed as they crossed a shallow river, the water splashing around Samson's legs. "Just thinking," Emma replied. "What exactly will my duties be at your ranch?" Jack seemed to consider his words carefully. "Whatever you're comfortable with. I need help with cooking, cleaning, gardening. The house has suffered with just me looking after it." "But I don't expect you to work while you're still healing." "I'm stronger than I look," Emma insisted, "and I'm not afraid of hard work." Jack smiled, the expression warming his typically serious face. "I've noticed." By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill and Jack reined Samson to a halt. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "Northwood Ranch." Emma gazed down at the valley below. A sturdy log cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby stood a barn and corral where several horses grazed peacefully. Fields stretched in 3 directions, with a small herd of cattle visible in the distance. A creek wound through the property, catching the sunlight like a ribbon of silver. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed. "It's home," Jack replied simply. As they approached, the cabin door opened, and an elderly man with a long gray beard stepped out, rifle in hand. When he recognized Jack, he lowered the weapon and broke into a wide grin. "About time you got back," he called. "Was beginning to think those Silver Creek boys got the better of you." "Not likely, Hank," Jack replied, dismounting and helping Emma down. "Emma, this is Hank Miller. He helps out around the ranch when I'm away. Hank, this is Emma O'Sullivan. She'll be staying with us." Hank's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in Emma's appearance, but he quickly tipped his hat in greeting. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss O'Sullivan. Any friend of Jack's is welcome here." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led off to what Emma assumed were bedrooms. "You'll take my room," Jack said, gesturing to the larger of the 2 doors. "I'll bunk with Hank in the other room for now." "I couldn't possibly," Emma began. "It's not up for debate," Jack interrupted firmly. "You need rest and privacy to heal properly." After a hearty supper of venison stew prepared by Hank, who proved to be an excellent cook despite his gruff appearance, Emma excused herself to the bedroom. Jack had placed her meager belongings on a handmade quilt that covered a sturdy bed frame. A washstand with a porcelain basin stood in one corner, and a small window overlooked the creek. For the first time in months, Emma felt safe. As she lay in the comfortable bed, listening to the low murmur of Jack and Hank's voices from the main room, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps this place could truly become her home. The next few weeks established a routine that Emma found both challenging and rewarding. Despite Jack's protests, she insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and cleaning and helping with the garden that provided much of their fresh food. Her back healed slowly but steadily, and with proper nutrition, her strength returned. Jack was often busy with ranch work, mending fences, tending to the cattle, breaking horses for neighboring ranchers to earn extra money. But he always made time to check on Emma, bringing her wildflowers he'd found on his rides or a rabbit he'd snared for their supper. Hank, who lived in a small cabin of his own on the property, became something of a grandfather figure to Emma. He taught her to shoot a rifle in case those Silver Creek varmints come calling, and regaled her with stories of his days as a fur trapper in the mountains. As autumn deepened toward winter, Emma found herself watching for Jack whenever he was away from the house, her heart lifting at the sight of him returning across the fields. She told herself it was merely gratitude she felt, but when their hands accidentally touched as they both reached for the same dish at supper, the jolt that passed between them suggested something far more complicated. One crisp November morning, Emma was hanging laundry on a line stretched between the cabin and a nearby pine when she spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. Her first thought was of Sheriff Tanner, and she hurried to the barn where Jack was repairing a saddle. "Riders coming," she reported breathlessly. Jack was on his feet instantly, moving to the barn door to look. After a moment, his shoulders relaxed. "It's Henry James from the next valley over, probably coming to see about that stallion I've been training." Emma released the breath she'd been holding. "Do you think Tanner's given up?" Jack turned to her, his expression serious. "Maybe, but I doubt it. Men like Tanner don't like being defied." He hesitated, then added, "Emma, if you want to move on somewhere safer, I'd understand." The thought of leaving sent a sharp pain through Emma's chest. "Do you want me to go?" "No," Jack replied immediately, his voice rough with emotion. "God help me, that's the last thing I want." They stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Jack took a step toward her, then stopped as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. "We should greet our visitors," he said, the moment broken. Henry James turned out to be a jovial rancher with a large property in the next valley. He brought news that made Jack's expression darken. Sheriff Tanner had been asking questions about Jack throughout the territory, claiming he was harboring a fugitive. "Thought you ought to know," Henry said, as he prepared to leave after examining the stallion. "Folks around here know Tanner's reputation, so most are keeping quiet, but it might be wise to watch your back." That night, after Hank had retired to his cabin, Jack and Emma sat before the fire, the tension from earlier still lingering between them. "Maybe you should go to California," Jack said suddenly. "I have enough saved to get you there safely. You could make a fresh start." Emma set down her mending and looked at him directly. "Is that what you want, Jack, for me to leave?" Jack stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What I want doesn't matter. I'm trying to keep you safe." "It matters to me," Emma said quietly, rising to stand before him. "Tell me the truth, Jack. Do you want me to go?" Jack's eyes met hers, filled with conflict. "No," he admitted finally. "I want you to stay, I want." He trailed off, looking away. Emma stepped closer, her heart pounding. "What do you want, Jack?" When he looked back at her, the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. "I want you, Emma. God help me, I've wanted you since I first carried you out of that town square." He shook his head, stepping back. "But I won't trap you here out of some misplaced gratitude or sense of obligation." "Gratitude?" Emma repeated incredulously. "Is that what you think this is?" Before he could respond, Emma closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, Jack stood frozen in shock, then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as he returned the kiss with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Emma," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "I love you, Jack Northwood," Emma said, the words she'd been holding back for weeks finally finding voice. "Not out of gratitude or obligation, but because of who you are, the man who couldn't walk past injustice, who treats everyone with respect, who works from dawn till dusk to build something meaningful." Jack cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "I love you too, Emma O'Sullivan, more than I thought possible. When I found you, I thought I was saving you, but the truth is, you saved me, from loneliness, from becoming hard like so many men out here." Their second kiss was tender, a sealing of promises made. When they parted, Jack took her hands in his. "I don't have much to offer yet," he said seriously. "The ranch is still growing and there's Tanner to worry about, but if you'll have me, I want to make a life with you here." Emma smiled, her heart full. "I don't need much, Jack, just you." Winter arrived with a vengeance the following week, blanketing the ranch in deep snow that isolated them from the nearest town. For Emma, the enforced seclusion was a blessing, allowing her and Jack time to know each other without the shadow of Sheriff Tanner hanging over them. They were married on Christmas Day, with Hank officiating in his capacity as the territory's traveling circuit preacher, a fact he had neglected to mention, until it became relevant. The ceremony was simple, held before the fireplace in the cabin, with promises exchanged and a ring Jack had fashioned from a gold nugget he'd panned from the creek. That night, as snow fell softly outside, Emma and Jack consummated their marriage in the bedroom that was now theirs to share. His touch was gentle, reverent, as he mapped every inch of her skin with calloused hands that could be surprisingly tender. Emma discovered a passion within herself that matched his, and in the afterglow, lying in his arms, she knew she had found her true home. Spring brought new beginnings. The threat of Sheriff Tanner receded when news reached them that he had been removed from office following complaints from several townspeople, including the general store owner who admitted Emma had offered to work to pay for the bread before Tanner arrested her. With the danger past, Jack and Emma focused on expanding the ranch. They added a second cabin for Hank, who insisted on staying despite Jack's offer to release him from his duties. Emma planted a larger garden, adding medicinal herbs she'd learned about from her mother, and soon found herself serving as an unofficial healer for neighboring ranches. By the time summer arrived, Emma had news that brought tears of joy to Jack's eyes. She was expecting their first child. As her belly swelled with new life, Jack's protective nature intensified, much to Emma's amused exasperation. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one evening as he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that weighed less than the bucket of water she'd just brought from the creek. Jack grinned sheepishly. "Can't help it. You and this baby are my whole world." Their daughter, Caroline, named for Jack's sister, was born on a crisp autumn day with Hank pacing nervously outside while the midwife from a neighboring ranch assisted with the delivery. When Jack was finally allowed in, the sight of Emma holding their tiny daughter, both of them safe and well, brought the strong cowboy to his knees beside the bed. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching Caroline's downy head. "Just like her mother." Emma smiled tiredly, leaning into Jack's strength as he sat beside her on the bed. "She has your eyes." As winter approached once more, Emma often found herself standing at the cabin window, watching Jack work with the horses or tend to the cattle, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her cradle. The memory of hunger and the whip's sting had faded, replaced by the warmth of family and the security of Jack's love. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Caroline asleep in Jack's arms, Emma was struck by how far they had come in just over a year. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "How strange life is," Emma replied. "If I hadn't been starving, if I hadn't stolen that bread, if you hadn't been in Silver Creek that day." Jack reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I believe we were meant to find each other, Emma. Some things are just destined." Emma leaned against his shoulder, watching the firelight play across their daughter's sleeping face. "Then I'm grateful for destiny," she said softly, "and for a cowboy who couldn't stand by and watch an injustice." Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I'm grateful for a woman brave enough to trust a stranger and strong enough to build a life in this wilderness." Outside, snow began to fall, but within the cabin walls, the warmth of love and family kept the cold at bay, a warmth that had begun with an act of compassion in a dusty town square, when a starving girl was whipped for stealing, and a cowboy paid her debt and carried her away to a new life neither could have imagined.